Are you feeling lost in a digital wilderness? Welcome to Lost in Siberia. We are your guide to navigating the world of cyberspace.
So whether you're a tech enthusiast or you're looking to land your first job in InfoSec, we're here to break things down into bite-sized pieces so that you don't have to. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Lost in Siberia. I'm Annie-Mei.
I'm Anika.
And yeah, we firstly just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who's listened so far. We've had a lot of really good feedback from people. We've got listeners in over 9 countries now, I believe. Mostly Australia. I would say 3/4 Australia.
Yeah.
But that's also made me think that I need to be a bit more mindful about the way that I talk, because I know I drop a lot of Aussie slang. So I think, if I do say anything that maybe someone who's listening has no idea what the hell I just said, please just, I'm going to be trying to be more mindful. Well, at least I try and translate what I just said.
I can tell you as well if I think it's all slang that I don't know.
Because again, it's something that I don't think about because I'm just so used to saying it that I forget that some people don't know if I use a phrase that might just not be common outside of Australia. But we've got listeners in the US, New Zealand,
Malaysia.
Europe, Malaysia, a few in Asia. So if you haven't yet subscribed to us on Spotify or Apple, please do so. And rate us 5 stars if you like the podcast. If you don't rate it.
Yes.
And also please follow us on Instagram. So our Instagram handle is @thecybersecurity_gals. I believe we have it linked in the podcast as well. So it should be easy to find us. Mm-hmm. So Anika, it's been a while since we did our last recording session. What have you been up to this year? How's your 2025 going so far?
Oh, I've been up to a lot of things. I had done a summer semester in my university so I can finish my degree faster. And I actually took some very interesting courses. And one of them was on crime prevention and security, which was very interesting to learn how regular crime prevention translated into crime prevention in technology. So, for instance, your gates and things like that have actually been translated to your firewalls. And then also taken a class on terrorism, which was very eye-opening, and done a lot of research on surveillance and how it impacts our lives. Also done a course in cyber on cybersecurity management, which was quite easy to do actually, because that kind of is what I do every day at my work. So that was very nice and easy. I didn't have to do too much for that one. And then I took a course on hate conspiracies on the internet in the age of AI.
Wow.
Yes,
okay.
That was my favorite. And I managed to do a mini research where I have analyzed Mark Zuckerberg's interview with Joe Rogan using a Python code and a bit of segment labeling and just kind of grouping words together to analyze it against hegemonic masculinity and against tech bro masculinity and the bro oligarchy, and how does that affect content moderation in the online space when it comes to misogyny and disinformation.
Okay.
That's a handful.
Yep, you just used a lot of big words,
Yes, essentially, to put it simply, for people that just went, what? And want to turn us off. What I've done is what happened with Mark Zuckerberg is that he had a really big announcement in the beginning of this year, how Meta is going to change its content moderation policies. It's going to remove its fact checkers that were introduced because there was quite a lot of misinformation on Meta platforms, on Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp. And those fact checkers were people that would go through a lot of posts that were flagged for misinformation, and they would decide if something was misinformation or not. And then also there were a lot of changes in hate speech content moderation. The changes were essentially that those moderations were removed, which now allows you to call women property on Facebook and Meta, and it allows you to call LGBTQA plus people mentally ill and some other very unfun things, which, someone that works a lot, not works, but researches a lot of the space around content moderation and what can we do to keep safe on the internet. That was very interesting to look into and say, well, how does the decision come along? And then looking at it from the feminist theory kind of point of view around masculinities and hypermasculinities, and something that we are going to talk about in CyberCon in a few weeks' time around tech bro masculinity and bro oligarchy that's happening. And the way that I did that was by analyzing the Joe Rogan and the Mark Zuckerberg interview. And if you haven't seen that and you have spare 3 hours, why not go ahead and check out what it's all about.
Or you can upload it into Notebook LM and then
Yes.
just ask it questions. Find it quotes for you.
Yes, and do that. Yeah. And I done it using Python code to essentially try to group certain segments of the interview and see which kind of words go together with other words to showcase whether it's masculinity related, which I found that it was. Again, if you do end up seeing it or you have seen it, there's quite a lot of talk about hunting wild pigs and bows.
Jiu-jitsu.
A lot of, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
jiu-jitsu was definitely mentioned more than women, minorities, and everyone did this content moderation.
Yeah, the jiu-jitsu conversation went on for quite some time. Yeah, because I've listened to it as well.
Yeah. It did go for a long time. I did learn a lot about wild pigs, though. I didn't. Yeah.
I didn't know you had a house in Hawaii.
Oh yeah, a compound. Like
I learned that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just finished that semester and about to start my new one, doing malware analytics and forensics and network forensics. So very, very excited about this one, actually. Yeah, going to do some proper technical cyber stuff. So that's me. What about you, Annie-Mei? What have you been up to?
Yeah, mine's been pretty hectic, but not work-wise. So I went to the US for 2 weeks. It was end of January. Mm-hmm. I just got really cheap flights back in October, and it was about $1,200 return to LA, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
So I traveled to the South, started in Nashville. I did Nashville, Mississippi, Meridian specifically, which is a very small town. I think it's about 30,000 people. And then New Orleans, which was really cool. And then Austin. Yeah, it was a good trip. I was worried it was going to be really cold, but by the time I got there, they'd just gone through a massive freak snowstorm. And it was snowing in New Orleans, which is basically unheard of. Luckily, I got to New Orleans after the snow had stopped because apparently everything had shut down. Like there was nothing open. So it was very good I was not there because I wouldn't have been able to do anything. And then just recently I got back from about a 10-day trip to, did a bit of a road trip around the North Island, ended up going to Waiheke Island for my friend's wedding. And that was really fun. Spent about 3 nights there. It was beautiful. I'd never actually heard of Waiheke. There was a lot of great wineries. It was nice to catch up with friends I hadn't seen for a long time from Melbourne. And yeah, we just had a really nice time. I was not really looking forward to coming back home and going back to work, but such is life. But yeah, I've obviously everything in balance, I guess. But yeah, sometimes I just wish I could just not have to, I could just take a whole year off, which I might do in a few years because honestly, I feel like there's more to life than just working.
For sure.
But I mean, I like doing stuff like this though because it's a creative outlet for me, and I don't see it as work.
No.
So I see this as my fun project, whereas work is. I've probably, I obviously don't want to say I hate my job, but it's like that feeling when you come back from holidays and you're like, oh, I have to go back to work. Yeah, got to go back to my daily schedule. Got to go back to the gym. Got to do all the get back into my routine.
Yeah, be grown up.
Exactly. But anyway, so today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about International Women's Day, but we're talking about it from the perspective of, is it a waste of time? Which might be controversial given that we're both women. But we want to discuss this because I feel like I've had conversations with a lot of women recently about what is the point of us still doing this? Because it just feels like it's a waste of, we go to these events and, we've spoken about this before one-on-one about how you'll go to these events where you just feel like you're in an echo chamber. All the women there already know what the issues are. We all know what problems that we face because we're experiencing them. Mm-hmm. And I just don't really see the point of us continuing this conversation where it's all pats on the backs to each other. Look how great we are. Yep. But it's so what if no one else cares outside of this room? Mm-hmm. So that's what we want to talk about today. So quickly, I just want to talk a little about the history of International Women's Day. International Women's Day became a thing in 1911. So it's been a thing for over 100 years. So it's pretty crazy. Yeah, because I feel like I only really started, I probably have heard about International Women's Day maybe at university, I reckon. Maybe it was the first time I heard about it. It was never really a thing when I was at school. But So it was marked for the first time in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland on March 19. Now that date's now changed, so we all internationally celebrated on the 8th of March.
Do you know why they changed the date?
I don't know. That's a good question. I probably should have looked into that a bit more.
No, that's okay. I'm just
But yeah, I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
I'll come back to you.
Question and notice.
yeah. I can put it in the show notes if anyone wants to answer to that without having to look it up themselves.
Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. So yeah, I guess what do you think about International Women's Day? And I think we also mentioned that when we talked about this before, about how it was very different for you growing up and like from your background and your culture. So yeah, I'm interested to hear about that.
Absolutely. Yes. On my side, I heard about it quite early on because I grew up in Eastern Europe. I heard about it pretty much from, I think, as I started getting memories of my childhood. That's when I heard about it. And in Eastern Europe, you may think that, it's a really bad place for women and they have really bad diversity. And you're probably right about most of those things. But actually, International Women's Day was my favorite day because all of the men of the household or school got together and organized it between themselves. And the women and the girls would get flowers and would get presents. And it was just a day I was always looking forward to, because literally all the boys in schools would give every girl a flower, and so you end up going with so many flowers going home, and you felt very lucky to be a woman, to be a girl, and something that I guess when I think about it, as we said before, you may think about Eastern Europe as a place that is not very friendly for women and minorities, which is probably true nowadays, but coming in the time that I lived there, it was just coming off Soviet Union falling apart. And actually the Soviet Union ideology was very gender equal, because it was not about your gender per se, it was about your status as a worker. It was a bit of a different structure. And my mom, who grew up during kind of like the Soviet Union time, I noticed that she doesn't really have this self-deprecating seed inside of her, that I sometimes notice in more Western women, where they don't really have enough self-confidence in their abilities. I've seen this like skit on SNL, which is just perfect, and it's about this. It's played by Kate McKinnon, who's just brilliant, and essentially she just plays this kind of a middle-aged woman, maybe a bit older, and she's like getting all of the people to come together, and she's giving them all these presents, and they start opening the present. She's like, "No, it's so bad. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I didn't put enough effort into it." And then she takes it to the extreme, where she's like, "Oh, I should just go and beat myself up. I should just like," and they took that whole kind of thing that women do, where they just decrease their values themselves, and they took it to the extreme to make it funny. But sometimes humor is really good in showcasing that.
Yeah.
And you go, yeah, why women do that? They actually do so much for everyone. They prepare food, they maybe get presents, and they self-deprecate so much. And
yeah. I definitely think that, I hear that a lot of, just people I interact with, especially women, tend to apologise for a lot of things. Whether it's in a meeting or something, like, "Oh, sorry, blah, 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 like, oh, I should have done this," or I don't know. I'm like, I feel like I'm the opposite now because I think I probably did that a lot when I was younger, but I think it was also just, that lack of confidence, and also maybe feeling like you had to, I guess, make those more senior to you felt like you had to appease them. Whereas now I just go, like, someone will just say to me, like, "Oh, you did," like, obviously I'll always own up if I've done something wrong. Say, for example, if I sent maybe an email that I shouldn't have, or didn't proofread properly or something, or if it's like if it is my fault, obviously I'll be like, yeah, I'll own it. But I think there's a difference between owning your mistakes and just feeling the need to apologise for something that's not actually really your fault. So now I'll just be like, if someone says to me something, I'll be like, "Oh, okay, all right, all good." And I'm like expecting me to say sorry. I was like, well, it wasn't really my fault.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think, in Western society, International Women's Day is not like that. I've definitely never gotten a present on International Women's Day. And I don't think getting a cupcake at work counts, because that's for everybody.
No, my dad would because we lived in another country, actually, that's a bit more Western. And we kept the tradition going, even though they didn't celebrate it in the country. And he would give me like full makeup sets. He would give me like a laptop.
Okay.
Like, compared to a cupcake.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a laptop.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course you'd rather have a laptop.
Yeah, but it's, it was true. Yeah, and I was always expecting it, and it was, nobody felt resentful towards it either. It sometimes happens, I think, with International Women's Day, and I felt that resentment sometimes of, oh, but why don't we celebrate International Men's Day, which I think is in November sometime.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because I saw a guy post on LinkedIn last year when, to be honest, I don't know when International Men's Day is. It's definitely towards the end of the year because I remember when this guy posted, it was like towards the end of last year. And he goes, oh, like, why don't we celebrate International Men's Day? And I'm thinking, like, well, actually, no one's stopping you from celebrating International Men's Day. Maybe you should do something. Like, I'm like, I'm not saying that we shouldn't celebrate men. In fact, I think, this, like, I just feel like the patriarchy hurts men just as much as it hurts women. Because you see, like, the statistics on suicide, for example, like, men are much more likely to commit suicide than women, especially young men. Mental health problems amongst men is, I'm not saying, it's I don't know what the statistics are of men versus women for like our age bracket, but yeah, like from talking to my male friends and just men in general, there's still this like massive stigma around what is okay to be talked about and what's considered as topics that are like showing vulnerability and like weaknesses.
Not manly enough.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the main problem. And I think, and I feel like, the whole International Women's Day, like, it's interesting because, like, when I think back to all the different workplaces I've been at, the places that have talked about diversity and equity and inclusion the least are the places where I've enjoyed it the most because it hasn't had to be spoken about. Because no one cared about it because we all just treated each other equally and there were no issues because everyone respected each other. It didn't have to be spoken about. It was like, the only reason those things need to be brought up is when they become an issue. So, for example, when I worked at really big consulting firms, their marketing strategy is completely about selling their diversity and inclusion and like we care about all these issues and stuff, and the reality is they don't. And I think it's really sad because they're taking advantage of people who think that they're going into an organisation that they personally might value, but the organisation doesn't give a shit.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the issue that I have with International Women's Day. And, like, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I had a male mentor a couple of years ago who told me that he wanted to speak at a women in tech organisation, and I won't mention which one it was, but they said to him, we don't allow men to speak at our events. And I thought that was shocking because, that's discrimination. Imagine me going to some organisation and they said, oh, sorry, we don't allow women to speak on our events. Okay. And also by him, he wanted to specifically talk about how he had put a lot of women into executive roles in his company because he owned a startup and he wanted to talk about that. And I'm like, okay, so you want to talk about the fact that you are empowering women to work in these higher up positions. And also he told me specific examples of when, say, I can't remember if she was like the COO or one of the exec roles and had gone into a meeting and the guy from the government department had thought she was the secretary or the assistant or whatever, and he said to her something like, oh, can you go get me something? And then she said, no, like, I'm here to run the meeting. And still, I think by the end of the meeting he still just like couldn't get his head around it. And then my mentor found out about it because she'd gone to him and told him later. And then he went back to the client and he just said, we're not working with you anymore, because he was just like, you can't treat my staff like that. He's like, just because I wasn't there doesn't mean that it's okay to treat my staff like that because she's very capable. Why did you treat her any differently than if it had been me running the meeting? And so it's stuff like that we need to talk about, It's
and
like,
they wouldn't let him speak.
No, I don't think he gave that specific example as to why he wanted to talk. But again, would it have made any difference? Probably not.
No, it wouldn't.
But I think, like, if we want to talk about actually moving things forward, how can we do that without having men at the table, having men in the discussion, and also actively engaging them in it? It's not just like, rather than, you go to these like women in tech events and there's like 2 men there.
Yep.
And I find it, interesting too, because like I have definitely seen events like that are coming up, and I've seen men like post in forums being like, oh hey, like me and a friend want to come, is it okay if we come? Because they think that it's only for women, which I think is the issue, right? Because then that's why they're not coming, because they think that they're not actually welcome.
Yeah. And I have a friend, we talked about feminism, we talked about loving men and emphasizing with them as the victims of patriarchy. And he does a lot of reading, he does a lot of research. He actually would call out like in WhatsApp groups, so some behavior towards me, which is quite incredible. And we were talking about, naming yourself a feminist and things like that. And he said, well, I don't want to self-congratulate myself and say that I'm a feminist. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, I haven't gone through the same struggles as you guys do. So I can't, it's a bit self-congratulatory to call myself a feminist. And I said, I don't think it is. I think like you calling yourself a feminist and being an ally for women, and maybe feminism also has negative connotation, but I said what you do is actually being a fighter for equality for all of us. And I think it's quite commendable. But you can feel that hesitancy around thinking that it's only for women. How can I relate to you if I'm not going through the same struggles? What will people think about me if I start acting in another way? Not specifically for my friend, I don't think that's an issue, but for him it's like, well, I don't want to be like, I'm so good, I'm better than everyone else, I'm a feminist.
Yeah.
Which I said, so many factors are there in the way of men maybe driving that change, right?
Yeah.
And so if we didn't have that conversation, if we not just didn't have that conversation, we have specifically told them not to come to the table. We said they were not welcome. Are we driving change, or are we driving change away?
Exactly. Yeah. It's just like taking things back, making things go backwards. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's for me when I come to those events, I had a feeling of not belonging, even though I'm from the same gender, and everyone in the room is like, oh, I'm supposed to be feeling like one of the girls.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just didn't, because they were, especially everything when I started it.
Because it was cliquey.
It was very cliquey.
Because they had made their own clique.
They made their own clique.
Yeah.
It was, it could be quite intimidating. And
and if you also don't feel like you're not dressed appropriately as well, and like, I mean, I can be that corporate girly and look all pretty and go to those events and look all dressed up and stuff, but that's not how I usually dress.
No.
And I don't want to dress like that all the time. Sometimes I just want to rock up in a t-shirt and jeans because I'm going to this for an hour and then I have the rest of my work day, which is actually, there's no requirement for me to look nice. And also I think it's a funny thing too, right? I do actually find that one aspect of working with mostly men a positive. I don't feel the need to dress up, and it's actually really a relief because you can just turn up to work looking however you want and you still look okay. Because like especially if you're working with a lot of dudes who like all are in jeans and tees, but it's funny, I go through phases where I feel like I'm like, oh, if I dress like this all the time I look like a dude. And I don't want to look like a dude. But then if I look really nice, I feel like they're going to think that I'm like trying to go out of my way to or either deliberately look different. But sometimes I just genuinely want to feel better about myself, and I'll want to wear something nice to work and like look really presentable. Like especially if like I have to go to an event where I am presenting or something.
Of course, client facing. Or
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's what I find as a struggle being in that kind of environment, because you struggle between like, well, I mean, I've never wanted to be one of the boys, but between you're like, oh, if I dress too casually, am I becoming one of them?
Am I going to be boxed?
Yeah,
into that category?
Exactly. And that's the thing, is I don't want to be boxed into that category. I still want that feminine energy, right? Like I want to be different because I don't want to.
I want to lose yourself. You want to still be yourself. You don't want to change for someone.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's a constant struggle between wanting to look nice and looking like a slob.
I think for me the biggest thing about dressing up, especially in the beginning for those events, and we talked about the costs, I think, of these events as well. If you don't have somebody sponsoring,
some of them are so expensive.
Yeah, and so let's say you bought this ticket already, and then like when I first went to them, I simply couldn't afford to dress up. I couldn't afford this very nice looking corporate clothes, or like sometimes it's galas and sometimes it's that kind of stuff. So you have that weighing on you already. You took some time of work, because not everyone can afford to just talk to them. And if they're not in cybersecurity and they're trying to get into the industry, they have to take a whole day of work.
Yeah, some workplaces might not let you take it, might not let you count that as your work time.
Yeah, so you have to take either annual leave or maybe leave without pay and miss that day of work as well. And maybe you have
call
to
in sick and hope you don't run into someone.
Well, do that.
I've never done that.
No, I haven't done that.
Yeah. Oh, I have.
Yeah. Well,
not for a long time. Because, I mean, obviously I only did this at a place that, like, I knew wasn't going to support me in doing that thing. But yeah, I mean, the last couple of places I've worked at have been fine.
Yeah, but I remember and just being present there and just feeling like everyone was just kind of, way in a different league from me. So even though I was, one of the girls, I wasn't one of the girls, and I didn't know anyone.
Yeah, and that's almost like, I think, harder, right? Because you feel, I should fit in here.
Yes,
and I still don't.
And then again, like you're just in your normal place of work, and I think the first time when I started working in tech, and I was like, everyone just dresses so casually. Oh my god, it's so comfortable. And then finding out that I was neurodivergent and how important being comfortable is for me, and I don't mind looking like a dude. And I don't mind having masculine or feminine energy as long as I'm comfortable. And I have a lot of nice shoes that I like looking at.
Yeah.
But I like, and I think I like the idea of wearing them. Like as soon as I wear them, I'm like, why did I do this to myself?
Oh, like you mean heels and stuff?
Yeah, heels. Heels and stuff.
Yeah, shoes that look pretty but are gonna literally cause you to stop being able to walk.
Yes, they're shoes that are nice to sit in.
Yeah.
I think that's like my mum and I call it. Yeah. And But it does, it's that presentation, right? It matters a lot, because they're also being presented in that almost pristine pink energy.
Yeah.
That if you are just a little bit of a deviation, you just straight away feel like, and like there's some internalization, of course, and I'm not saying everyone is like that and everyone feels like that, but yeah, just showing.
I know what you mean though, because there's definitely been some events where I felt very comfortable going to, but that might have been also because I knew a lot of people there. There was people there that I could already socialize with. They were my friends, right? It wasn't just people that I knew from my network, but actually genuinely were friends, like people who I hung out with in my spare time. And then there's other events you go to and you go, oh, vibes a bit off here. Why is everyone so weird? Like acting so formal and rigid. It's meant to be a welcoming environment for all types of people, but it's not given off that vibe. And you just go there and you go, oh, and you look around and you go, oh, there's actually no one here I feel comfortable going up to and having a chat. It's not like everyone's got very welcoming faces, and it's very corporate-y. A lot of those events, very few people go alone, so that makes it harder to interact with other people too, because a company will usually buy a whole table, right? So then a whole company will sit at one table, and so when people arrive, they go, oh, I already know that person from work. They'll go up to the person from work, and then that group of people from work will talk to each other and they'll socialise, and they might only interact with another table because they might know someone from that company, and then they'll interact. But it's
you just know like that one person, and you just like awkwardly standing around them. Yeah. And you just like hope that you know someone else. Yeah.
But yeah, I know what you mean, because it's like, it's weird enough because it's like you already feel somewhat like an outsider in the industry, but then you go to an event that you feel like is supposed to be nurturing and supporting and empowering you, and you don't feel any of those things.
No. And then you don't actually. I mean, the first time you go, you may hear something for the first time that goes, my God, I did not know that.
Yeah, I've never thought about that.
Yes, I never thought about that. But then you attend the second one and the third one, and you go, wait, I already heard all of this. And so,
it's the same people speaking at all these events.
Usually, yes.
That's another thing we haven't spoken about too, is I just feel like they talk about men inviting their mates to, or when you go to events and you see the same people speaking at all these events. But it's the same at these women-only events. And I've talked to you about this before, but I remember how someone had come to me saying they were looking for a MC for an event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
And they said, oh, can you think of anybody? And so I asked around a few of my friends who've organised a lot of events and stuff, and I said, hey, can you think of anyone who's quite funny, bit like very outgoing, is going to like get the crowd going, because we want to run this event. We want a good MC. And then one of my friends suggested this woman. And so I looked her up and I was like, oh, cool. Looks doesn't look like a nerd. Not that there's an issue with looking like a nerd. I probably should clarify that. But
that could mean anything.
Yeah.
That could mean anything.
What I mean by that is she looked like she had a life outside of work.
Oh yeah, I know what she means. Okay. Yeah.
She didn't look like she lived in a basement.
I see what
hadn't
she
seen
meant.
sunlight for 12 months. Yeah.
I get it.
And I was like, yeah, cool. And she said they'd had her for a previous event. She'd been great. Everyone had found her really, interesting, inspiring, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, cool. So I put this lady's name forward. I've never met this lady, by the way, so I don't know. And I had no personal connection to her. And the person who was organising the event comes back and sent me a link to this lady's Instagram account. And I'm like, okay, it's random. Why are you sending me a personal? It wasn't personal, it was her, modelling account. So this lady did modelling in her spare time, right? And there was some photo, and she goes, oh, we can't have her. I'm like, what do you mean, why? She goes, oh, because have you seen some of these photos? And so I'm scrolling through the Instagram account. There's some photos of her in lingerie and stuff. Like, that's what models do. They model clothing. And I just replied and I go, I don't see what the issue is. And the response, and this is like what we're talking about, how you go into an environment where you feel like the vibe is off and you don't feel included in the environment. She was like, we're a professional organisation. We can't have someone but also she had her modelling agency in the bio. So obviously she was it wasn't like she was doing this in her spare time, randomly. I wasn't an OnlyFans account, right? It wasn't like there was a link to it. And even if there was, people...
She's a professional woman.
Yeah.
She's a professional. She models.
She does stuff outside of work. What is the issue? And I thought about this for a while, and I was after this whole incident, and they ended up going with someone else who was much, I would say, I guess she found a safer option. I would say that'd be the correct term to use, because she was a bit older. She was a bit more established in the industry. But again, it was someone who speaks all the time at these events. And I'm going, but this isn't new and exciting. I'm sorry, but it just feels stale to me. And I think it just, anyway, so going back to this girl, it took me a long time to work out why this woman had an issue with us getting this lady as the MC. And I thought about it for a while, and I realised, I was like, it's because she feels so insecure about herself that she can't handle the fact that this young woman who is very attractive and clearly does stuff outside of work that isn't just staring at dashboards and looking at incidents that come in and dealing with cybersecurity incidents, that she just could not handle the fact that this woman was I guess for want of a better word, hot, and she felt intimidated by her. And I was like, this is last year, it's 2024, how are we still not supporting other women in their endeavours?
This is so interesting, because I'm looking at it from the feminist theory, and I recently finished reading The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, where she talks about how boys, men and women are victims of the capitalist imperialistic male supremacy patriarchy. And I'm just looking at it from that prism around the woman that also does modeling at work. Mm-hmm. And if we think about kind of the nerd masculinity, right? I work really hard, I'm always at my computer. I don't have time for anything else. I don't sleep.
Yeah.
I go to bed at 4 a.m. after I had some Red Bull. I wake up at 6 and I'm back at my computer again. I struggle really hard to get this role. And I think what happens is some of the women go into the industry and they're like, I have to be this way too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm not a legit nerd.
Yeah, then they won't respect me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when you see someone who has a life, as you say, well, they are not, I guess, they didn't buy into that idea.
No, she's just living her life.
Yeah, they didn't buy into the idea that work has to be all-consuming, that work has to make you take sacrifices over your private life and your dreams and anything else that your mind wants to do.
Yeah.
It has to be the only thing you ever do. And if you're not sacrificing something for your work, then you're doing it wrong. Yeah, and you go... And also, I guess, there's the whole other thing around purity. Or, well, if somebody models, they can't be also very smart and professional.
Yeah,
and you go,
and they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, they're mutually...
Exactly.
But you were saying this, and I was like, I love David Pocock as a senator. I think he's great. But I saw his Instagram video where he like took his shirt off and he was like in his boxes swimming. So like, shouldn't we let David Pocock be a senator because it's not professional? Like, how dare you like take your shirt off and your
But
pants
apparently
off?
it's okay to be an ex-athlete and then become a politician. So it's a double standard.
But you see how harmful it is then you have a woman that doesn't let another woman progress in her career and progress being an MC and progress in her networking, because they are also bought into this patriarchal model.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and that's the other thing. Men are not the only issue when it comes to the lack of women in this industry. Other women are, I would say, almost like equally as to blame. Because, I mean, yeah, like you said, yes, the lack of support, she could have gotten that opportunity to do something and gotten, and I think that's why I decided that I wanted to do this, right? Because I was so sick of putting forward some ideas and them getting shut down by people that I didn't agree with either. And I'm not saying that all my ideas are correct and everyone should agree with me, but it's that lack of, I just think that people like who claim to be progressive and care about women in this industry, some of them don't. They're out for their own agenda, and that's all they care about is their own career, their own pathway. And like you said, the fact that this idea of trying to fit in with the boys, and like I've seen this in group chats, right, where there's a bunch of cybersecurity people in the group chat, and there's a few women because that's just to be expected. And the way that the women, like when everyone's talking and like I would say like it's a very open forum and like everyone's very nice to each other. There's nothing like untoward going on, but you can tell that like some of the women feel the need to speak in this like nerd speak. It's like a nerd lingo because they want to be one of the boys. And I find that I'm like, look, all fine if that's genuinely how you want to talk and that's how you interact with people, but if that's not if you're genuinely only doing that because you're trying to fit in, and some of these people like, you know, they're in their 40s, and like to me it's like, you know, I feel like we're a bit younger, and I feel like I'm just at the age now because I feel like in my early 20s I did try and fit in with everyone. I did want to be like everyone, you know, when I was I wouldn't say I wanted to be like everyone, but there was definitely an aspect of succumbing to peer pressure. Like when it came to, not that I didn't like drinking and doing all that, partying and doing all those things, but I feel like there was definitely an aspect of sometimes going out for the sake of going out because I knew everyone else was going out. Whereas I feel like now I'm at the age where I'm like, if I don't want to do something, I don't care what anyone thinks. And I don't want to fit in with everyone. I'm like, I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to carve my own path because I'm so sick of having to bow down to how other people think that I should be pursuing my life or my career.
I absolutely agree with you on that, and I have to admit that I think I was this kind of a person who would use that kind of a nerd speak sometimes just to try and fit in.
Just trying to fit in, yeah.
And be like, I love, you know, ethical hacking. I just really want to be like an ethical hacker. And, you know, kind of like buying into this whole idea of like, I'm so tough, look at me. Which was so easy to do as well. And then I realized that, I guess, that wasn't really me. And I think I realized that when there was a lot of victim blaming speak, where like, you know, you always assume that people that don't know IT, that don't know cybersecurity, as well as maybe some other people do, and it's their fault that they got hacked, it's their fault that they got breached. There is almost no empathy towards the person, and it's being laughed at. And then the first few times you like kind of like giggle along, and then you feel that fool, you go, you better. Like, that could have been you. That could have been
like, I shouldn't have laughed at that. Yeah.
I shouldn't have laughed at that. And actually, this is a big problem. And from somebody who studies criminology, when you think about victim blaming, the first thing that comes into my head was, what was she wearing? And we're not supposed to do that. And it's very important we don't do that, that we have the accountability on the perpetrator of the crime. And it's like, what was their password, right? And I get it. And I get that we need to have accountability for the person as well. They have accountability for their security. But you and I both know, being on this journey, how little awareness people have around computers and around their own safety. People that you think would have more awareness, and they just don't. And they will assume that somebody is just going to be there to protect them, because that's how things usually work, right?
Saying someone tries to break into your house, you call the police.
Correct. Yes.
It doesn't work. It doesn't
work.
So, yeah.
And I've done some research around cybercrime policing in Australia and also overseas. It doesn't work like that. There are avenues to report hacking and to report ransomware, and you can call the police around them. It's a bit complicated, but they're setting up federal agencies to do that now. But if your photos got leaked online, and let's say like one of those photos was you modeling lingerie, or maybe something saucier, that's it. You're on your own, mate. Like,
yeah.
And it's so sad, because if somebody broke into your house and stole them, nobody would have said anything to you. They wouldn't have said, "Oh, but did you lock your door?" Well, I mean, they could have said that, but they would still sympathize.
They probably would ask that, yeah.
Yeah, but they would still sympathize with you and say, "You're still a victim in this," you know.
Yeah, they wouldn't be like, "Oh, you're a bloody idiot."
Correct. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But then if somebody made a deep fake of you or whatever, they just laugh at that. And maybe they don't want to laugh either. Maybe they also have that rule that says you shouldn't laugh at that, but because...
Probably also laughing because they're like a nervous laugh, because they also don't want that to happen to them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it was like, that maybe they feel like that's what they're supposed to be doing, to buy into that culture of that toughness. You know, I'm not vulnerable, I'm not fragile, I'm anti-fragile, that will never happen to me. And so you laugh in the hope that it doesn't happen. Well, in fact, if you care about the safety, the cyber safety of others, you would educate, and you would take this opportunity to emphasize, first of all, and then educate, because when you judge, you create a gate, like you create a wall between you and that possible victim, where they will not come to you ever to ask you before the bad thing happened.
Yeah, and I think it's also because, especially when it comes to things that relate to computers and devices, there is a bit of a stigma, especially for women, to be like, "Oh, I don't understand how they work," right? I think it's changing now, but it's happening slowly. But yeah, and I guess I think, there's a good place to end. I think maybe if we wrap up and start talking about key takeaways, what people can actually do to make a difference this International Women's Day. And the first one that I'll talk about is, my friends are coming to me and asking me for cybersecurity advice. They'll send me screenshots of stuff that happened. They'll be like, "Hey, this happened to me. Like, what should I do?" For example, when Apple sends a message to you saying, "Hey, this password's been leaked on the dark web," and they've clearly used the same password because it's shown up with like 6 different accounts, and you're going, "Yeah, I'm going to assume you've got the same password for all those." A bit weird that all those passwords got leaked from different companies on the same day, because I know there haven't been that many breaches in the last 24 hours. And I appreciate that, because I know that means that they trust me, right? They trust me to not judge them. They trust me to provide them with actual useful actions that they can take away and then implement. And I think, if we're talking about what can you actually do this International Women's Day to make somewhat of a, even if it's a small difference, it doesn't have to be a massive change, but I think it's like, if you're a tech savvy woman, help your friends who might not understand, but explain it to them in a way that's not judgmental, and explain it to them like, "Hey, if you get scammed, it's okay, but here's how we could prevent you from getting scammed." Because there's no shame in getting scammed. I've been scammed.
I've been scammed. Not
online, but in real life, which I can talk about another time. But it's quite a funny story. It was funny in hindsight, not at the time. But we can talk about that another time. But everyone, doesn't matter how smart or intelligent you are, anybody can get scammed. And like, even people like Jack Rhysider, who runs like Darknet Diaries, has been targeted by people. But again, that's because he's such a high profile individual. But it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how safe you think you are, there's always a chance, because there's just so many attack vectors. So that would be my one piece of advice, is like, if you are someone who's knowledgeable in some area, you might not be tech, maybe you work in finance, educate your friends about money. I think that's like actually one of the talks that I actually really liked from last year. One of the International Women's Day events I went to was a woman actually gave a really interesting talk about financial freedom. It's not about getting rich, it's about being financially free and learning how to invest, how to get rid of that bad debt, how to be smart with your money. And you don't have to earn a lot of money to be financially free. But it's because things like lifestyle creep start happening with people who earn more money. But just because someone has a lot of things, like they drive a BMW and they live in a really nice, a fancy house, they're probably in crippling amounts of debt. And I think it doesn't matter what industry you work in, but how can you share your knowledge with other people and like actually make an impact to someone else's life, and especially for women who might not be as well educated in areas like technology or like finance. So yeah, that's mine. What's yours?
It's a really good one because it also means extend your hand to help. And I think if we take it back to the International Women's Day events, if you are at one of those events and you are fortunate enough to have friends to come with, look out for someone like me or whoever, like when I was starting in, look out for those people. Be proactive because you have that status now to be able to do that, and they don't. Get them in your circle.
Yeah, bring them into the conversation or introduce them to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just introduce them to one other person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, introduce them to some other person because you have no idea how meaningful this will be for them. And I'm so grateful for people who did it for me, who brought me to the table, who had that faith in me from the beginning when I didn't have much to say for myself. And if you are in one of those events, then call out. Why don't we have male speakers? Why don't we have more diversity in these events? Say this as well. Start the conversation.
Write to them. Write them an email.
Write them an email.
Hey, I want to see more men.
Yes.
At these events. I want more male speakers.
Yeah. Why are we preaching to the converted? I mean, wouldn't it be a better investment of the time and the money of everyone if we had an equal representation of all classes, of all genders, of all types of people in these events? So when we call out to the people who need to hear it, but also to the women and around the way that they also can contribute to that by changing their attitudes sometimes. Because it's not just men that need to change and that need to have the will to change. It's also us and the way that we approach situation. I think we have emphasized it quite a lot, like in this podcast, that both sides need to come to the table for meaningful change to happen. But what happens is one side is not welcome at all and the other one also gatekeep quite a lot of other communities out of it. So yeah, call it out, write them an email, talk about it. I mean, your circle of influence is this small. And you may think that I can't do anything, but it's not true. Because you speak to one person, that one person speaks to another person, then they speak to us, we say it in our podcast, a few people listen here, then they talk about... Change starts from these small mini actions you take every day. Every day can't be International Women's Day. And it shouldn't be. No, but every day, if cyber safety of everyone is your priority, if gender equality and diversity is a priority for you, then that small little action that you can take every day. And of course, you won't have an event every day as well, but do it at your work.
Not.
I mean, do it at your work. If somebody says something that you find a bit, shouldn't laugh at this, say something.
Yeah, just speak up.
Speak up.
Make your voice heard.
Yes.
Because also you only get one life.
Yeah.
Might as well make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to. I feel like I'm one of those people, like, I hate the idea of living with regret of things I wish that I had done. And I feel like a lot of people, you just don't want to look back on your life and wish that, I wish I'd said something at that time, or I wish that I'd contributed to this, or I wish that I had made more of an effort with this. Just do everything to the best of your ability, because we don't get a long time on this earth.
But don't do it from a place of resentment and anger, judgment. When you judge and you come from that place, as we said, like, presentation matters a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit hard to listen to someone who is very aggressive towards you. And sometimes some of the men, like, I don't blame them for kind of not participating in the conversation. Even if they really wanted to, sometimes it can be very hard. And I find it like I have to constantly filter my thoughts as well, because, sometimes women go and say something like, oh, men, And I'm like, and it's one of those things when I also laughed at it, and it's like, shouldn't laugh at this. Because if someone said, oh, women,
Yeah.
that's not
You
good.
wouldn't want someone to say that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so call it out. And call it out when it happens towards other women as well. And it may be very scary sometimes, but as long as you do it from a place of empathy and wanting everyone to work together and to live in a safe and equitable society, I don't think you can come across hateful and aggressive. And you will actually, like your short movies with Honey, you will actually get listeners, and that's how you drive meaningful change.
I think that's a good place to end it.
It is.
All right. Thank you for tuning in again for this episode of Lost in Siberia.
And we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.